Welcome back to the channel. This will be the best wildcard team for Gameweek 15. There is such a quick turnaround yet again with that Saturday deadline at the more usual time of 11 AM in the UK. I'll be going live as always, answering all your questions. I'm providing graphics, team news, injury updates, and that also includes the top 10 captains and the clean sheet odds, which you see on screen right now. Newcastle are top, facing Burnley at home with a 49% chance of keeping a clean sheet. Man City are second and Arsenal are third, with Man United, Brighton and Everton completing the top six. And in last spot is Sunderland, facing Man City away from home with just a 10% probability of keeping a clean sheet. These stats are taken by the website fantasyfootballpundit.com. I also refer to them in my UCL fantasy content, and keep your eyes peeled for the best wildcard and limitless squads, my team selection, and another deadline stream next Tuesday. Be sure not to miss it by liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and also hitting that notification bell so you're always up to date on my content, both FPL and UCL fantasy, until the end of the season. Let's get this video to over 100 likes and closing on new goals like 38k on YouTube. Check all the links in the description for my Patreon and the championships, the Discord server, FPL League and Spotify. But without further ado, let's jump straight into it. My squad value is 101.2 million, and I've also got 0.1 in the bank, but spending power is always different. Using a website like FPL.team, which I refer to later on to show you the starting 11 and captaincy, you can see the spending power overall, which will differentiate to your selling prices, for example. But I'll start off with the two goalkeepers, and for me, there are probably 3 to 4 options I'd be looking at as your main option. And whilst you might consider a goalkeeper rotation of a Bruggen with Dubravka, or even with someone like Kelleher, for example, I would still recommend going for someone more reliable between the sticks. You can find a nice entry point into that Chelsea defence through Robert Sanchez. He only costs 4.8 million, and whilst he's a template pick, he has been one of the most informed goalkeepers over the last couple of game weeks. He blanked against Arsenal essentially, but he still made plenty of saves to deliver 3 points overall, and he kept 3 consecutive clean sheets just before that, and we'll see how he does in Gameweek 14 because there are some matches still going on, and you'll see more analysis and details covered in my upcoming videos like the transfer tips and my team selection. But David Raya is probably the best goalkeeper in isolation. Jordan Pickford is now the highest scoring goalkeeper at this point of the game week, and we'll see if he's going to be number 1 for points scored amongst the season or across the season until the end of the game week. But this is going to be a very difficult position to nail on completely, but you also don't want to make transfers in this position too regularly. You want to focus your efforts in the outfield areas and particularly in that midfield and forward line. I think with goalkeepers, you want a set and forget option onto your next wild card, and my preference is to save that chip for after Gameweek 30 in the second half of the season with all the doubles and blanks headed our way. But Sanchez will be facing Bournemouth away next. The next couple of fixtures don't look particularly great, but I still think Chelsea could keep clean sheets, and Robert Sanchez is the best way of covering their defence overall, even over Chalobah and Cucurella, who are 2 of the more nailed-on options in that defensive line. Reece James will be in and out because his minutes are always managed. He is a very injury-prone player after all. And then you've got Malo Gusto, and you could see both of them play at the same time, with James playing a more hybrid midfield role, and they can swap between themselves in the match. Then you've got Fofana, but he can be rotated with Tosin. And I think with that Chelsea defence, there are too many question marks, but Robert Sanchez provides a bit of clarity. Now, we could also see some rotation here in the game against Leeds, for example, later on, and also Everton at home in a couple of weeks' time. That would be my only concern. We saw last season Jorgensen get the odd start in the Premier League in a fixture against Southampton, and this also happened in other competitions as well. But I still think Robert Sanchez is the clear number 1, and he'll get more than 30 starts in the Premier League season. As for the backup, you don't need to spend too much money. I think Dubravka will do the job, but I wouldn't mind going for something like Bruggen and Kelleher potentially if you are quite keen on that sort of structure. I don't think it's necessarily something I'd recommend. I prefer having one certain figure option, and for me, Raya and Sanchez will be the standouts. Roofs has been brilliant, but having said that, he also has some difficult fixtures, and I do expect a drop in form. I mean, it's Liverpool away in Gameweek 14, and then it's Man City away next, and Sunderland are bottom of the clean sheet odds. You can always cover that defence with a Reinildo Mandava or a cheap defender like Mukiele at 4.2 million. So ultimately, when it comes to goalkeepers, Jordan Pickford will always be right up there. Then you're looking at Sanchez, and David Raya is probably the best on paper. Dubravka will be the best in terms of value. He's a set and forget option as your backup. He can come in when needed and do a decent job from time to time. But with the rest, Verbruggen could pique some people's interest. But despite Brian's great fixtures, I don't think he'll be that reliable when it comes to clean sheets in the long term. But let's now go to the defensive line, where we've got more avenues to points with defensive contributions, goals, assists, and bonus points. Daniel Munoz is 1 yellow card away from suspension, so we could even see that happen in Gameweek 14, and then you just switch him to a Marc Guéhi or Lacroix, and you save 0.9 million in the process. But I still think Munoz will be the pick of the bunch at 6 million. He offers far more attacking potential, particularly from open play, and he's a very exciting defender to own in Fantasy Premier League. So I think he speaks for himself. You might even want to consider covering Palace defensively in a different sort of way with Dean Henderson between the sticks, but I would still rather go for one of their defenders. Tariq Mitchell will be my least favourite because he's the most likely to drop out for a Borna Sosa, for example. I think Chris Richards offers great value and he'll start most games, but he's also the most likely from those three centre-backs to be rotated with the young, promising French centre-back Canvot. So that's something else you want to bear in mind. But Daniel Munoz will start virtually every single game for Crystal Palace, and the only problem with him is he gets a lot of yellow cards, which is why he's walking that suspension tightrope. Next up is Jurrien Timber. He costs 6.4 million, and if you've got value tied up in him, then that's even better and makes him a more appealing pick for the long term. It is Aston Villa away next in Gameweek 15, but Arsenal have some decent fixtures afterwards, but we could see rotation between him and Ben White. If it doesn't happen in the Premier League over the next couple of weeks, it almost certainly will in the Champions League for matchday 6 when Arsenal play Club Brugge. So I would be quite cautious of a lot of these Arsenal assets. Even Saliba could be back from his injury very soon, and Trossard as well, but Hincapié and Mosquera are quite decent right now in the short term. Calafiori is another player who is on that suspension tightrope. One more yellow before Arsenal play their 19th game, and he will be suspended for a Premier League match. So we could see Lewis Skelly play against Brentford, for example, on Wednesday night, and that's something you have to also bear in mind throughout the month of December, which is such a congested fixture schedule for the likes of Crystal Palace, Arsenal, and Chelsea. And if you ever see a time where both Timber and Munoz are benched, that will likely be in Gameweek 14, but I don't think that'll be a major issue in the long term. Let's now go to another premium option. You don't need to stack up your defense this way, but I do like this sort of structure, and with DEFCON this season, it does push you towards going big at the back for the first time in several years now. But Virgil van Dijk is up next. He got a clean sheet against West Ham in a 2-0 win, and he's one of the very best when it comes to defensive contributions, especially amongst premium defenders, and he's got the goal threat from set pieces. I think Liverpool will keep the odd clean sheet here and there, but we need to see some consistency from them first. Konate might offer better value, but he's also more injury prone, and I think Van Dijk is just a certain figure option and worth the extra millions over his other Liverpool teammates. But we've got 2 spots left in this defensive line, and you could arguably go for Van Hecke, and that's your way of covering Brighton defensively rather than Verbruggen between the sticks. But one choice is going to be Estev, just to have as a backup. I've been saying this before, I'm not a massive fan of having Dubravka and Estev, and I think one of them would be enough, but thinking purely about the value and how cheap they are, it allows you to go for more expensive players in other positions. But if you have enough money, I would recommend an upgrade to, let's say, someone like Mukiele, for example, or Van den Berg, and I think Van Hecke would be the ideal one at 4.4 million. So if you've got 0.5 in the bank after building this 50-man squad, I think Estev to Van Hecke is the way I'd go, and I think that's a massive upgrade, and you want as much squad depth as possible throughout the Christmas period. December's going to be chaotic when it comes to these quick deadlines, and a lot of things can happen in the process. Now, despite blanking against Tottenham Hotspur in a 2-2 draw, I still think Chow is one of the best Newcastle defenders. He now costs 5 million. His ownership is slowly rising, but he remains a massive differential. Dan Burn got an assist and also DEFCON, so you could also look at Dan Burn as a solid choice. He was on my bench for Gameweek 14, unfortunately, but I think Chow or Burn would be great ways of covering the Toon army. You've got Aaron Ramsdale starting in goal for the next couple of weeks, but that's not really a long-term pick, so I'd rather just go for a defender, and Newcastle have excellent fixtures until January, so you get a nice balance with this defensive line. You're covering Arsenal, Liverpool, Chelsea and Crystal Palace defensively, and I have to say Newcastle are still one of the very best when it comes to the underlying numbers with XGC, expected goals conceded, and they'll keep more clean sheets than most teams in the Premier League. Now, Estev could certainly be improved upon, and going to Van Hecke is my preference. But let's now move on to the midfielders and see where the sort of budget picks of Dubravka and Estev will get us when it comes to more expensive options. It's still early days in Gameweek 14 and things will become much clearer after all the Wednesday matches, but I'm currently at 85k, and the main reason why I got massive green arrows in Gameweek 13 and 14 so far is because of Phil Foden. I brought him in on the free hit last week and he got that massive return against Leeds, and he surpassed that against Fulham with 17 points overall in a 5-4 thriller. It's Sunderland up next and Man City are near the top of the FDR alongside Liverpool, which I covered in my recent streams, and he offers great value at 8.2 million on his current form. He had a very poor start to the season, only one return essentially against Man United, a couple of goals in the Champions League, but not so much in this competition. But that's changing now over the last couple of weeks, and Man City with their fixtures and also the form they're showing offensively, I think Foden could even be considered for the captaincy. He was in my top 5 list over the last 2 game weeks and he has proved himself to be an excellent choice on both occasions. I'm also going to go for an Arsenal midfielder, and you've got plenty of choices here. Martin Odegaard is now back. Zubimendi is not someone I really recommend in Fantasy Premier League, but Eze is certainly a reasonable choice, and he's got a very high ceiling, as we saw against Tottenham Hotspur through that hat-trick. And Bukayo Saka is an excellent choice, despite the fact that he's not really offering great value at the moment at around 10 million. But Declan Rice is second for FPL points scored amongst midfielders. He might even go top tonight if he gets a return against Brentford. Antoine Semenyo is the one standing in his way, but Declan Rice costs 7.1 million. I think is a great acquisition on the wildcard, and whilst there could be one benching in December, maybe even 2, I still think Rice will start most games in this Premier League season, and he will be a contender for the Premier League Player of the Season award. He is probably the most likely from Arsenal to win it if they want to go on to win the title. But I think Rice has good fixtures overall, and Arsenal would still be favourites in the difficult games like Aston Villa away. But that's going to be a very tough test. That's a fixture where you could bench Declan Rice on paper, but I still think it's worth the investment in the long term, and you offer great value with a set piece threat, the assist potential even from open play, and the odd goal here and there with some DEFCON sprinkled in between. So I think these 2 midfielders are quite locked in on the wild card, and the same goes for a certain Bruno Guimaraes, who has been excellent recently. He has 71 points for the season, and he's right up there when it comes to points scored amongst midfielders. He also costs 6.7 million, and a lot of these players I've discussed are going up in price essentially. So they're very popular picks now, or people are starting to invest in them and show some belief. So the transfer activity rises. I think also the lens is going to be magnified on them. So we're going to show them a lot more attention. But it has been several weeks now that I've talked about Bruno Guimaraes, and he's my favourite Newcastle midfielder. I was asked about Harvey Barnes on multiple occasions. So despite his goal scoring streak against Man City, Brentford and Marseille, I was still highlighting Bruno Guimaraes as the superior FPL option, and we'll see rotation between Gordon and Harvey Barnes, and that's already been a factor over the last couple of days. But we're now going to complete this midfield, and Bryan Mbeumo is still an excellent choice. You can go for him for the next week or so and then sell him, but that would be booking in a transfer. Despite having 5 available moves after Saturday's deadline going into Gameweek 16, that is still something you want to be kind of conscious about and not book in unnecessary transfers. So Bruno Fernandes would be my choice of the United midfielder in the long term, and Bryan Mbeumo could always be reintroduced by the time we get to February after the African Cup of Nations. But Fernandes costs 9 million. He's currently in my FPL setup. It's Wolves away next, where he could be considered for the captaincy. He has solid underlying numbers, particularly when it comes to key passes, and I think the big chance created will improve as well. But he is a great captaincy pick for a reason. He was very popular for Gameweek 14. We'll see how he does on Thursday night, but moving forwards against Wolves away, he could definitely be considered for the captaincy there, and United have excellent fixtures in the short term, and I think Bruno Fernandes will be the best pick by some distance. I know people have been asking me about De Ligt, Luke Shaw, maybe a few other United assets, but for me it's always been Bruno Fernandes or Mbeumo, and whilst Mbeumo has been the better pick over the past 2 months overall, I still think Fernandes will be more consistent over the course of the season, but don't expect as much in terms of goals and open play threat compared to Bryan Mbeumo. But this will be a great opportunity for Fernandes to rise the sort of rankings and the leaderboards and go right up there near the top of the highest scoring midfielders in FPL. If he scored those 2 penalties that he missed early in the campaign, he would be right up there, maybe even top over Antoine Semenyo. But I still think Fernandes makes up for it with the creativity, the set piece threat, and he is still the main penalty taker for Manchester United. But the last midfielder is a sort of budget option. Elliot Anderson is still my preference over Reinders, who scored in that 5-4 win against Fulham, but Anderson will be very consistent at 5.4 million due to DEFCON. He is scoring that consistently now under Sean Dyche, and he can also get the odd assist here and there and some bonus points. But I think Anderson is the sort of perfect 8th attacker and fifth midfielder to rotate with your main options. But what you see here is a balanced midfield. You've got Foden and Bruno Fernandes at that sort of 8 to 9 million price tag, and you might even want to stretch to Cole Palmer in certain situations, but I wouldn't really force that in and jeopardize one of Rice or Bruno Guimaraes. There's also Minter, who I do like the look of, and a few other midfielders that I've talked about in my recent Wildcard podcasts. That includes Enzo Fernandez, but you can't have them all, and it's about prioritizing, and you can shift this on a weekly basis almost, but you don't want to book in too many transfers at the same time. Let's now complete this team with the three forwards, and there is a significant change compared to the recent template I've discussed of Mateta, Haaland, and Igor Thiago. It has been a while since Erling Haaland didn't feature in a best wildcard team. He is clearly the best premium in the game. Despite a few frustrations in the last couple of weeks, even in UCL Fantasy, he did make up for it with a solid return against Fulham, and captaining him seems to have been the right decision, but we'll see what Bruno Fernandes and Mbeumo have to say about that on Thursday night. It's Sunderland up next, and Haaland could be triple captain in such a fixture. If you still have that booster, my recommendation is Gameweek 17 against West Ham at home. Erling Haaland has a great record against the Hammers, and it's also about prioritizing because you've also got the wildcard and free hit chips in some examples, and you need to lay out a clear plan on when to use every single booster. Now, it is team dependent, but something you might want to consider is free hitting in Gameweek 15, wildcarding in 16, and then using the triple captain in Gameweek 17. But make sure you use all your boosters before we get to Gameweek 20, because by that stage you'll be using the second half of the season chips, and that's something you don't want to do until later on in the campaign with all the doubles and blanks, where Erling Haaland will also be looked at for the triple captaincy as well. But the next forward is Igor Thiago at 6.7 million. The Arsenal fixture is out of the way by this point if you bring him in for Gameweek 15, and Tottenham away is not a bad fixture because Spurs are 19th in the Premier League table. When it comes to home matches, they are much better on their travels, and they got a very important point against Newcastle in that 2-2 draw. Romero with an incredible finish at the end and a brace overall. But Igor Thiago's on penalties. He can walk away from any fixture and get a return, and he's very strong in home matches, and you've got some promising games on paper coming up very soon, like Leeds and Wolves, where Igor Thiago could be considered for the captaincy. He's a clear talisman for Brentford, so whilst you've got Dango Ouattara and Sharda who will pop up with the odd goal, I think the most consistent goal scorer is quite clearly Igor Thiago, who is second for goals scored this season, only behind Erling Haaland in the grand scheme of things. The third forward is Danny Welbeck, and if you do have enough money, I wouldn't mind stretching him to Nick Voltemada, but that would mean a triple up in the Newcastle team, and I would have some reservations about that. Something else you could do to fund Nick Voltemada is downgrade Bruno Guimaraes to Minter, and that gives you 0.5 million extra, which you can then use to do Esteve to Van Heck as well. So there are different things you can do with this wildcard squad, but I still like Mateta. I haven't forgotten about him. I don't suddenly think he's a terrible pick. I just think the fixtures aren't looking as good at this point now, with the Burnley fixture out of the way, and Crystal Palace could rotate quite heavily in the month of December. There will be some exceptions to this, and with Ismaila Sarr out because of the African Cup of Nations and also the injury he sustained in Gameweek 13, I still think looking forwards, we could see Mateta start the vast majority of matches, with Nketiah playing alongside him in a front three with Yeremy Pino or Kamada. But it'll be very interesting to see how Oliver Glasner approaches this December period, and will he rotate heavily in certain areas, and players like Mateta suddenly become some big concerns, because only a couple of weeks ago against Wolves, he was subbed off in the 59th minute, and that's something you can't tolerate as an FPL manager with a player who costs 8.2 million, 8.1 now. So Joao Pedro is still decent. You've got other forwards to consider. Raul Jimenez is someone I've highlighted recently as a budget pick and massive differential, but I think it's between Haaland, Thiago, Welbeck, Nick Voltemada and Mateta as the top 5 forwards in Fantasy Premier League. There is a clear standout in goal. I would pick Robert Sanchez over Dubravka, despite the fact that Chelsea faced Bournemouth away, but the Cherries have been in poor form over the past month. Starting Munoz, Chow and Van Dijk is what I would recommend, with Foden, Bruno Guimaraes, Rice, Bruno Fernandes, Welbeck, Haaland and Igor Thiago. On the bench, there's Timber, Anderson and Esteve, and if you want to change a few things, then, as I mentioned before, Bruno Guimaraes to Minter could give you enough money to go from Esteve to Van Heck in certain situations. Not with my budget though. The expected points is 55.4, Haaland as the captain and Bruno Fernandes as the vice. You will see my top 10 captaincy list in upcoming videos and also the deadline stream on Saturday. But to look at alternatives, this would actually increase the expected points to 56, and there's more money left over in the bank. And with goalkeepers, I've mentioned David Raya. Jordan Pickford is always going to be a top goalkeeper option, and Verbruggen could be of interest to certain people. I'm not too keen on Petrovic, to be honest, and the only Bournemouth defender I would consider is Senesi because of DEFCON. He is now available after serving that 1-game ban, but Munoz could also be downgraded to Gay or Lacroix, and that also helps you make the other upgrades I've discussed. There is Chow or Dan Burn. I think either one is a solid choice. With Virgil van Dijk, there is the possibility to downgrade him to Kanate, but you don't need a Liverpool player, especially at the back, because they still have their moments of vulnerability and they aren't exactly reliable this season. But I'm very keen on the likes of Foden and Fernandes. I think they're great long-term picks. So whilst it means no Bukayo Saka, which is something else you might want to consider, you've also got Declan Rice, who I showed you earlier. And here you can see Minter and Enzo Fernandez. And you can also have even more money in the bank, for example, by downgrading Munoz to Lacroix or Mark Gay, and then going for Welbeck to Nick Voltemada if you want two Newcastle players. So what I want to do in this section, of course, is highlight the best players in every single position and alternative picks depending on your budget, preferences, and the teams you want to pile up on. But I think one or two Newcastle look solid. I don't think a triple up is necessarily that appealing or convincing, because there might be a week where they have a great fixture like Burnley at home this week, but I think a triple up might be a little bit overboard with Newcastle overall. But maybe you disagree. Let me know your thoughts down the comment section below. But I think Haaland and Thiago are quite nailed on in this wildcard team. Then it's between Voltemada, Mateta and Danny Welbeck for that final spot. I wouldn't go for Welbeck alongside Minter, but that's just a personal opinion of mine. And with the goalkeepers, you can rotate with Kelleher and Verbruggen, but I think one of Raya or Sanchez should do the trick with Dubravka as the backup. Let me know your thoughts down the comment section below, and thank you very much for watching this video and this podcast. If you enjoyed it or found it insightful, then like this video, subscribe to my channel, and also hit that notification bell so you're always up to date on my content, both FPL and UCL Fantasy. Let's get this video to over 100 likes and closing on new goals like 38k on YouTube. Follow me on X, Instagram and Blue Sky, Dylan RCM, and check all the links in the description for my Patreon and the championships, for likes to my videos, proud to add comments, amongst many other perks. My Discord server, the FPL League and Spotify can also be found in the description. I'll see you on Saturday for the next deadline stream, and keep your eyes peeled for UCL Fantasy content and my team selection.